One of the things that we do is focus on that healthy standpoint of the leadership team. A lot of times we teach from Lencioni, 5 dysfunctions of a team. We'll teach the trust pyramid. But I think what happens is that when we start to set up different structures around meetings, such as what we call level 10 meeting, those meetings start out with a segue, which is what's a best both personally and professionally, so that leadership teams have some sort of kind of jumping off point to say, oh, I didn't know that about you, or I didn't realize you did that.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Welcome to the Small Business Mentor podcast, where we shine a light on the black holes of business growth with your host, Alan Pence. In each episode, we explore the leaps and bounds entrepreneurs make as they push their businesses beyond the 1 million mark into the realm of professional sustainable growth. Stay with us as we navigate the journey from brute force to finesse.
All right, today we have Gabe Muller, who is an EOS Worldwide implementer, and he is ours from my company. Gabe, welcome to the podcast.
Alan, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. So give us a quick background. Like, how did you become an EOS implementer?
So it's an interesting story. A quick, very high-level background. I was introduced to EOS back in 2015 through someone who introduced me to another implementer. Fast forward 4 or 5 years, I was running my own consulting business, and I decided to go back into a financial planning firm. That's my background. And that financial planning firm actually was running on EOS as well. It turns out that the implementer for that firm was actually the person I met in 2015-ish. And so full circle, right? It was one of those things that just kind of came back to life and full circle. We meet again. He was our implementer. His name is Randy. He's now my business partner. And so I sat in the integrator seat for a few years running on EOS, and we were the recipient of that. And so as it would go, I thought I really loved being an entrepreneur, and so it was time to go back out. And this was kind of during COVID when I went back into the firm. And so I went back out and became an EOS implementer and have used the experience that I had within the firm to then help my clients now, just like yourself, implement EOS now from a professional standpoint. So that's really the quickest story behind how I became an implementer.
So you were in financial services, so like investment management. You were the integrator at that point, right? Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah, I sat in the integrator position, and a lot of people think of the integrator implementer. They're always kind of confusing the terms and think of the integrator as the one inside the business, the integrator. So yes, I was sitting in the integrator position, generally known as the COO or a president of the company.
Yeah, and so EOS we talk about EOS like everybody knows what it is, right? So I had a friend who I referred to, Gabe, who called it EOS. So it's like, all right, first we got to fix that part, right? Then you can start learning the other. And it stands for Entrepreneurial Operating System, which was developed by Gino Wickman. I don't know how long ago.
It's about 20 years now. Yeah.
And it's kind of a set of principles and tools and processes to help run a business. What I think is sort of unique about it has this integrator visionary dichotomy. So do you want to talk a little bit about what that is?
Yeah. So the Visionary-Integrator duo, as we would call it, is a pretty powerful combination between two different functions of the business or of the leadership team. Visionary in the sense that whoever's in that function has a really good ability to kind of see around corners, look in the future, look for big opportunities. They generally have a ton of ideas, big idea people. That contrasted with their integrator, who is very much focused on execution, removing obstacles for their team, holding everyone accountable to the processes and systems and things we set up. They're the ones that really kind of counterbalance the visionary. And frankly, are kind of the glue between the rest of the leaders and the visionary. So that duo is a really powerful combo. And there is actually a book in EOS library called Rocket Fuel that specifically speaks to that combination.
Yeah, I thought that was really compelling to me because I think, my just impression is most companies are driven by a visionary, but they're also like often driven off the cliff by the visionary. So they're they kind of get stuck in spots because of the visionary's way of operating, which is natural and can't really change all that much. And so it's really elevating the role of that integrator that allows the business. I guess the way I would say it is sort of like visionaries are usually pretty good salespeople, and they kind of get the company up off the ground and get it into existence, but they don't manage the chaos that they create through the sales very well, right? And so that's where the integrator comes in. Is that how you kind of see it?
I think of the integrator as the one that's really taking all the ideas that the visionary has and should have, and frankly filtering them into the process appropriately. So they're kind of guarding against the chaos that might go in further into the organization if that integrator is not there for the visionary. But the visionary really does need a strong integrator to execute, those plans.
From my perspective, that's been one of the most important things that I've learned. And when do you kind of recommend that people, I mean, a lot of people self-implement EOS, but when do you recommend that people kind of bring in EOS and or bring in an implementer? What kind of revenue marks or whatever play?
Yeah, I think that from a very high level, EOS is harnessing human energy to create business results and clarity. And when a company or an organization gets to the point in which they're growing despite themselves, they're a successful company, they're doing things well, and then they step back and say, how did we get here? It's most likely the point in time where you want to step back and say, we probably need to put a process around what we're doing so that we're all aligned. And I think that what I've seen is organizations that really get into that, level of wanting to have professional management and leadership so that they can build out, teams below them and things like that. That's really the turning point that I see. And so we say companies that are running, 10 to 250 employees. I definitely have clients that are a bit larger than that, but that's really the turning point. I think it's when you really want to put a process around how you're systemizing your business and you actually can commit to it and fully commit to it. That's the right time to go for it. But again, I think the key there is making sure that you realize that EOS is not meant to come in to fix a broken business. It's coming in to optimize what's already been a successful business.
I just say, like, look, if everyone's running around with their hair on fire, probably just go implement EOS. Like that's about the time. And I think it's difficult for it was for me, visionaries to kind of be able to admit to themselves that they're probably not the best person to solve the problem. And they have to, I think, this is part of my philosophy of business. You own a business, you got to kind of confront yourself and your limitations and realize that probably the statistics show that if you started a company and drove its growth, you're probably not the person to solve that problem. Is sort of the point, right?
That's well said. Yeah. And I got to commend you. You have a really great self-awareness that, you don't get in the weeds and you really, allow those, other leaders to run that. And so that is a super important point that I think that anybody listening would want to take note of, is that you have to have a level of self-awareness as a visionary or founder to kind of let loose or let go of the vine, as we'd say, to allow that process to work.
And you're pretty new at this, right? You started in COVID, you said, at some point?
I became a professional implementer in October of 2022. So, I'm a year and 8 months or 9 months into it.
And you have how many clients now? This is incredible.
I've worked with now 42 different organizations so far.
Keep in mind that means doing a full day meeting, and once you're in it, so you start out with 3 full day meetings and over 3 months, and then you go into a quarterly rhythm of all day meetings for once a quarter. So you're doing that potentially 30, 40 times a quarter.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. If you think about some of the terms we use in EOS, which is right people, right seats, I got to tell you, I love what I get to do through those sessions, and frankly, being an implementer is right seat for me. So it just works.
Okay, so you've seen across 42 plus with companies you worked with before, different capacities. So what is it that you're usually seeing when you come in to a company for the first time? Like what's characterizing these businesses?
What I find we focus a lot of our time on is understanding, does somebody from the leadership level from the get-go, do they truly understand that function? So what we like to say is do they GWC, or do they get it, want it, and have the capacity to do it, fully understanding what's expected of them in that new, call it, I say new, but really the defined and the clear role of that leadership function that they're filling. And so I feel like a lot of times we find ourselves dealing with people issues really up front because, as you know, we start our time together, what we call journey together, in that very first session, creating structure. So it's all about structure first, people second. And so when we create the structure, what does that business need to run well, and then put people into it, you start to find where either people need development, they need training, they need mentorship, whatever it is, to improve their ability to lead. And so I feel like a lot of things I'm seeing from the get-go are, I'm calling them people issues or calling people opportunities. Either way, we're dealing a lot of times with the people things.
Kind of want to drill down on this because this was one of the more significant parts for us. Is I guess what you're kind of saying is you come in and the leadership team, it isn't all the right people in the right seats, and or the people might be potentially in the right seat, but they don't yet have the skills or training or whatever to occupy that seat effectively. So then you come in and say, all right, let's do the structure of the company outside of, let's forget about who's on the team now. Let's do the structure. So are people able to do that without protecting their own job?
It's actually a really challenging thing to do. And so when I ask teams to kind of detach from people, especially if you have a long tenure there, it's an incredibly difficult thing to do. And when I start working with clients, I really try to frame it in the sense that in order for this system to work, we really need to detach from those egos and what's happened in the past, and look forward to say, what does this business need to work well, or what hasn't worked well, and we put clarity around. And I'll tell you that once you really start to narrow in on those main functions of the leadership, and for example, finance or sales and marketing, and then you really put the roles and responsibilities behind it or under it, and then you put somebody in that function, well, the process itself actually allows somebody to realize, is that something I actually can do and have the capacity to do well? Or is it because I'm really being self-aware here that it's not? And so the process kind of flushes itself out. And then as a leadership team have to be healthy enough to provide feedback to each other along the lines of, do you really think your colleague understands that function well? And do they have the capacity to do it? And do they want it? So the process really flushes itself out, and you get your answer either way. But again, I think from a people standpoint, it's definitely difficult to do.
How often does somebody end up leaving the team, do you think, as a result? Either gets demoted off the team or leaves the company. Like, is that common? Or
I would say that having gone through, some full cycles with a variety of different clients, that the process itself is definitely doing its job in the sense that you do start to see some changes on leadership teams, call it a year and a half in. And that's not uncommon because, if you do think about the whole, genesis of your business, kind of what got you here won't get you there. And sometimes it's the who, not the how. And so those things do present themselves. And frankly, a leadership team has to have the ability to make that hard decision, or that individual, as such as a leader, has to make a hard decision themselves. And just part of the process, really, when you step back and look at it.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I have this rule of thumb that I say every time a company grows by 50 to, or every time a company doubles, or, vaguely it could be triples, whatever, you're going to probably have to turn over some amount of your leadership team. And it's, from what I'm gleaning from you, like within that year or two after people bring in EOS, probably somebody's leaving, something's changing at almost every company. And I think that's why, because the reality is, as a company changes, the roles of the people running it change. So your salesperson at 5 million is different than the sales job at 20 million. And it's a very, I think almost all companies get ground to a halt because, as I said earlier, part of it can be the visionary themselves not realizing they're the problem. And then additionally, it's like their inability or reluctance to confront issues on the team, having the wrong person in the wrong seat, that holds the company back. And when you look at the stats on how many companies get through each growth stage, or each revenue stage, I mean, it just drops to, once you get past 5 million, it's like almost no companies ever get bigger than that. And I would say 100% it's because they don't confront the issues on the leadership team.
That's what it is. I mean, we call it entering the danger. And I'll tell you just a real quick story is that, one time I created the structure, we put the roles behind it, the things that they're responsible for in a particular operations function. And when we went around the table, 12-person team, rather large leadership team, the person that the team thought would be the one to really lead that function, who had been there for quite some time, essentially self-opted off of that because she realized that it wasn't made for her. She didn't have the capacity to do it. And she wanted to be in the business doing more of the hands-on work versus leading it. And so the process did its job for her. And it wasn't an emotional thing. It was just, okay, now we need to find that, and it's an issue. But you are a subject matter expert, and let's put you into the business further and keep you close to the work. And that's what we did. But that's what happens. Those types of things happen.
Yeah. And so I think what's really helpful is also you tend to promote people from within, give them jobs. Most companies aren't super formal about that. So that person might have never even had a job description before, right? It's just like they do sales and no one knows what that means, really. I mean, vaguely, but really the EOS process forces, here are the roles, here are the 5 or so major responsibilities of that role. And then here's the person that's appropriate for that role. And then you do 2 things, right? You fellow team members rate that person against the values of the company, right? You either give them a plus minus, or a minus on each of the values. And then the second thing is you ask each person, do you get it, want it, and do you have the capability to do the role? So it's a huge commitment device, right?
It is. And it's also a feedback device through that as well, right? And so when we talk about accountability from a leadership standpoint, a lot of times I've been asking the question, can you force accountability? And the answer is no. But accountability is a byproduct of leadership and management, and the roles and responsibilities that they know that they're accountable for generally has a measurable to it. So you wrap that with a system of management such as EOS, and you start to see, do they actually truly get it, want to have the capacity to do it because they're actually accountable for it. So it all really wraps together. But yeah, we start with those value sides and get it, want, and the capacity to do it.
And I just want to be clear if people haven't done it. I don't know if everyone does this, but Gabe actually does that in the room with the team directly. He's like, do you get it? Do you want it? Do you have the capacity to do it? And I think my guess would be everybody kind of says yes, except for that example you showed. But then it does have this effect long term where if it's obvious over time that they don't have one of those 3 or they're not the right person, it does end up usually with them exiting somehow, which is why you see that delay of a year and a half, right? So even if it doesn't happen in the room at that moment, it will happen over time. Have you ever seen like real fireworks happen as a result, like in the room at the time?
Just yesterday, I was in a session. Somebody, have you ever seen this happen? And I have to tell you, Alan, I've seen a lot of things so far happen in these sessions. And yeah, I mean, I think what it also does is it illuminates things that might be under the surface that have been boiling there that haven't come up, but now they have a platform or a runway, if you will, to take it, and they do. And that does create some serious conversations or tension in that room. But it's also an indication of how healthy that team is, assuming that they can either handle it well or not. So again, I always like to say, careful what you wish for with EOS, because you're probably going to get it whether you like it or not. And it's just going to depend on the timing in which that occurs.
How was it Archibald MacLeish that the voters vote for the politicians and then the politicians give it to them good and hard? It's like, careful what you wish for. All right, let's talk about that, the evolution of team health too, because I think that's part, again, like EOS isn't an event, right? It's a process where you're kind of, what I've noticed is you can really build trust in a team over time. And actually people, just seen in my company, people opt in or opt out It's pretty powerful when a team starts trusting each other and the people someone doesn't feel a part of that. That's a real, people bounce off of that usually. And I think it's a pretty authentic way for those issues to get dealt with, because the person really sees it and doesn't need it. It doesn't come as a surprise. They don't need to be explained. But talk about that with like how you see leadership teams develop over time, and what are the keys to that?
Well, one of the things that we do is, focus on that healthy standpoint of the leadership team. And so vision traction, healthy from a standpoint of how trusting is the team. And so, a lot of times we teach from Lencioni, five dysfunctions of a team. We'll teach the trust pyramid, lots of work that's involved in that. But I think what happens is that when we start to set up different structures around meetings, such as what we call level 10 meeting, which is a weekly meeting, those meetings start out with, a segue, which is, what's a best both personally and professionally, so that leadership teams have some sort of kind of jumping off point to say, oh, I didn't know that about you, or I didn't realize you did that, or didn't know what X, Y, or Z. And so it's starting to build this level of awareness around people. Now, I think that Lencioni does an amazing job with the five dysfunctions of a team, but we start with trust, but that's such a vague word at the end of the day. It's like, I trust you're going to do the right thing. But really, in order to get to trusting someone, I think we have to have a level of self-awareness of what we're good at and maybe not, and being able to be vulnerable with each other to have that conversation that then builds to that first rung of the pyramid, which is trust, right? So there's a difference between trusting someone's going to do the right thing versus I'm going to trust you're going to follow through, and if you don't, I'm going to call you out and you're going to be okay with it. I think those are two different things. And I feel like clients that I've been working with for, over a year now, we go through our annual process, and that first day is generally on team health, which is all about trust. And so I'd say that leadership teams start to really gel, call it a year and a half into the EOS process, because there's tools inherently built in there for that to hopefully occur or not, and again, somebody might self-opt out of that because they don't want to have that level of vulnerability that may be needed to do it, and so the tools are so wrapped together that it's beautifully, it works out beautifully in my sense, that you don't have to force it.
Yeah, no, it is interesting. And again, yeah, like emphasizing that process part, it takes time for teams to get better at things. And I've just seen our level 10s go from, I think we went from like not really solving issues to like we kind of go through them quick now. It's not like a laborious process, right?
Yeah, it should be a space where you guys get your, issues at least chipped away at, put it that way.
I'm a big proponent of the self-managing company, and I kind of feel like almost all owners go through this process where they, at the beginning, they're everything in the company because they're the person who sells the stuff. And then they got to get to this place where they're really the CEO, not the doer. And so that, EOS obviously outlines that with the visionary box. But then I think there is a point at which you can build the team healthy enough that it doesn't even really need the owner there all the time, right? I mean, there's various levels of involvement that make sense for different people depending on what they do. But really your goal is to have a self-managing team that doesn't rely on you for sales or marketing or finance or anything, right? Or accountability. And you're kind of move into what you call, I guess EOS calls the owner's box, right? So talk about like, have you gone through that, seen that happen where like, someone goes from, hey, I'm in the day-to-day to being the visionary to kind of like even having the team operate well without them?
Oh yeah, we've gone through that. And that obviously takes time. We start that off with creating, like we said, the structure, and then therefore the accountability chart with all those functions. And yes, founders generally land in that visionary function, but when they have a smaller team, you oftentimes find that they're also responsible for sales and marketing. There's a two function kind of thing there, which makes sense. But what it does is it just highlights the fact that we need to backfill that in some sort of prioritization and budgeting way. But the entrepreneurs that want to use this type of system so that they can have a self-managing and running business are the ones that generally want to then get themselves off of the accountability chart, which I guess you could think of as kind of like the day-to-day execution or week-to-week things, and go into what we would call in EOS terms the owner's box. And then what we do is wrap that into some sort of monthly or quarterly cadence for them and any other of their partners, that they're getting what they need from a profitability standpoint, financial standpoint, all that strategic, but allowing their accountability chart or the functional leaders to then go execute that. And then they come back on a quarterly basis to check in on it. And so it gets that founder out of all of that stuff, and it puts clarity around what they're expected to do and what they're not. And I think that is the beauty of that. But it takes time, and it takes a lot of trust from a founder to allow that to occur. And founders that like to hold on to things, that's going to be a very big challenge to do.
So how often do you see that that's sort of a goal that someone has? Is that common?
I thought it would be a more common thing. I'm finding, honestly, that a lot of founders still have a very difficult time removing themselves from the accountability chart, let's call it the visionary function, because they feel like they're losing control. But again, I think it comes back to the type of entrepreneur or leader and really what their main goal is. But I will tell you that right now, that's a challenging conversation to have. I just went through it a few weeks ago again, where we took 2 founders off of the accountability chart, put them in the owner's box, and we left one of the founders on the accountability chart because he wanted to stay in the day-to-day. But those 2 founders, during our session to make that happen, you could tell there was a bit of anxiety to that, because they're like, are we going to be missing out? I kind of want to be involved in this. And it's like, well, what's your ultimate goal here? And what's your highest and best use? Is it to be in the day-to-day? And if it's not, allow somebody to thrive in that role and then inform you on whatever cadence you need as an owner. And we're going down that path. But if I looked at my entire client base, I'd say there's just a few outliers right there that we've gone through that process, as you know.
I wonder how much of it is a need for control, trust, versus a worry about their identity, losing their worth, and like no one calls them and needs them anymore.
I think that there's a lot that goes into that. And again, it comes down to that entrepreneur of, what's important to them. And I do think that identity is part of it. I'll give you this example, though, is real time, real example. That is, these individuals, obviously owners and founders, they are subject matter experts in exactly the service they provide to their clients. And that's their highest and best use. And they have people around them that could be the leaders of the departments so that they can go do that, which frankly will build business, right? And so allowing them to kind of free themselves from all the day-to-day stuff and just go do what you got to do gives them that identity still, which is what they want. But in this sense, I think it's more of, we don't want to lose sight of what's going on. We kind of need to be in the know, but that's just more of a growing standpoint, in my opinion, of the evolution of that system.
I tend to think, and just listening to you talk, is it almost always the goal to get the owner off the accountability chart? And that's really just a more mature, professionally managed company, because the owner can always screw with his own accountability or her own accountability, right? So I guess EOS wouldn't say this, right? But basically the goal is get the owner out of any accountability in the business and into the owner's box.
I'll just say this, the term lifestyle business, but still want to put in a system around it. I do have family businesses that I can't imagine that they would ever go down that path. Husband, wife, and call it 5, 6 children running that business. And so there's no way that would happen. So I guess it just depends. But, I think that most of my clients, I do think, want to head that way. But it's a super challenging thing to put your head around and not feel like you're missing out or you're losing control. Because at the end of the day, you're still the owner. Let's just put it that way.
My feeling was, and I don't, I'm a pretty strong visionary, right? So like I was actually destructive to the business, right? Because like I always have to be doing new stuff. I get bored and I have, 100 ideas, and it's like the company doesn't need 100 ideas. Particularly, I think this happens when they get bigger, right? Because you kind of figured it out. And now you got to let the process. I mean, there are times when things have to change, and there's a certain amount of change you need. But if you're a professional change agent, like maybe running the company is not your highest and best use. So like I found I had to go out and do stuff like this, right? To satisfy my itch to do new stuff all the time. I would give advice to owners. They come in all shapes and sizes, so it's not universal. But if you're that type of person, you really should be heading to the owner's box at some point, because you're probably a destructive force within the company. And I do think that owners that are doing it to stay relevant, my experience would be, and you hear about this after people sell their businesses, right? They go through depression and identity issues. And so, like, what better way to kind of head that off than to gradually move into the owner's box, lose that accountability, and go find out what you want to do before you sell your. And now you have this asset that doesn't really depend on you, and it's far more valuable as a result, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, one of the things that you mentioned is like when you have strong visionaries who are serial entrepreneurs or whatever type of entrepreneur you want to call it, that need a lot of ideas and new things that are happening. It's probably the exact time that you realize that you shouldn't be running the business, because if you are running the business, you're probably going to run it into the ground, or you're going to have people that leave you and you're going to then have to start over. So it's like this growing aspect as an entrepreneur, but a leader and an owner to say, look, I built a great thing here and I'm going to trust the process because I got the right people to do it. And when those things change, you got a system to change it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's, owning a business is all about increasing levels of self-awareness. And if you embrace that, it's great. If you don't, I mean, I'm sure you walk into a lot of businesses where that has not been embraced. And I can't imagine the family aspect either. After being in YPO and seeing people who are part of family businesses, oh my gosh, I have no desire to do that. I would be selling my business. No kids coming in. Well, that's great. I love talking EOS. So let's talk a little bit about your other interests, though. You're a huge advocacy and participant in flying. So talk a little bit about Smokehouse Pilots.
One of the things that I've been doing since 2010 has been flying airplanes. I became a pilot in 2010, and so it's been an interesting evolution. The only reason I became a pilot was because I was working at a financial planning firm in Florida. And this was right out of college. And during my lunch breaks, I found myself going to Page Field Airport down there in Fort Myers. And for whatever reason, I was watching and listening to air traffic control and watching the airplanes land. And I thought, I'm in financial planning. How cool would it be to learn more about flight planning and then write about the correlation between financial planning and flight planning? And that's what I did. And I did it off of a whim. I did not have any connection to aviation. But that's how it started. And then fast forward, to today, we have Smokehouse Pilots with, 7,000-8,000 people in there. And it's a huge community. And what's interesting was that when I started flying, I had zero friends in aviation, not a single soul other than my instructor. And today my life is essentially all of that. And what I like about it is that what I was trying to do back then of writing financial planning and flight planning kind of things, now I can correlate process of what it is that I do for my clients and implementing and following process with exactly that of aviation, because everything in aviation and flying a plane is process. So there's a ton of correlations there, and I have a lot of things I'm working on with that as well. So that's kind of the genesis, and that's kind of where we're at. But there's a lot of stuff going on with Smokehouse. It's been a lot of fun, and I've met some amazing people along the way.
One thing I thought was interesting to highlight is now you have a series of clients that have come out of aviation, right? For the EOS business. Is that right?
That is correct. Yep.
Yeah. So I love this integration of like your hobby that you love doing with how you do sales. Like that's an admirable thing to get done.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I thought about this for a while, and back in, years ago, I had this passion for figuring out how to intersect passion with profession and live this integrated life. And I have to tell you, it's kind of coming to life. And I didn't even it didn't dawn on me until I think you actually said it to me. And I thought, well, that's interesting, right? And now I can use my airplane to fly to client situations, or just as an example, last week, had a client from Charlottesville came up, picked me up in their jet and turboprop, and we flew to Nashville for our quarterly. And they're all pilots, which is kind of cool. And they run a business. And so I've met a lot of aviators who happen to run businesses who need help. You'd be surprised how many airline captains or pilots have a side gig that run businesses. And so this has never been an intentional thing. This has just been something that's evolved because I had a passion for both of those things. I'm very grateful for it. I love using the plane for now what is now a profession.
I just got to figure out how to do that with wine, and So tell us more about Smokehouse. So it's this kind of interesting thing. You're trying to create like sort of a social network of pilots. Is that the idea?
It started out in Leesburg, Virginia. So it was just a few of us, and we would go on what we would call these flyouts, and we'd come back to a place in Leesburg, which was a barbecue place called Smokehouse Live Barbecue, and we would just have dinner, have a drink, and debrief that flight. Well, we did that almost every month. Well, there was an idea to say, hey, why don't we bring in a speaker and bring some more people? And so that just started happening, and then we would have these monthly what we call flyouts where we'd have 40, 50 people show up, and we would have a speaker. We'd have an astronaut, we'd have an airline captain, we'd have whoever wanted to tell a story, and then have a good conversation. And so we've been doing that since 2015. Well, then that turned into doing what we call flyouts. And so now every month we schedule a flyout, and we take anywhere between 30 and 70 airplanes to a place up and down the East Coast, and we all converge on that airport, and we have lunch. But I have a team that we now run Smokehouse, and as a matter of fact, we run Smokehouse loosely on EOS. I mean, we have a leadership team, and we have meetings. We follow the process. We have a swag shop. We do all kinds of different things, but the ultimate goal here is aviation plus community equals opportunity and impact. That's our mission statement. That's our reason why. And that didn't come to us until about a year ago as far as articulating it that way. But the whole goal is to bring people together who have a common passion, who want to experience things together, and hopefully give back or create impact along the way, such as providing to scholarship funds or giving somebody their first flight, things like that, but things that may not come along in life, right? And when I look back at becoming a pilot, again, having zero friends in aviation, this is something I would have loved to have back then, but that's kind of the reason we have it now.
Well, that's really cool, Gabe. I appreciate you coming on the pod. So if people want to reach out, what's the best way to get in contact?
So I have Gabriel.Muller at EOSWorldwide.com, smokehousepilots.com, or certainly shoot me an email, but all kinds of social things, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, all that good stuff. But I'm not too hard to find.
Well, that's awesome.
I appreciate you having me on, Alan. I really do.
Of course. Yeah, it was really fun. It was cool talking to EOS. So appreciate it.
You've been listening to the Small Business Mentor podcast, brought to you by Alan Pence. For more insights on how to navigate your business through its black holes, visit @apence on X. Don't forget to search for Small Business Mentor in your podcast app to subscribe. Thank you for joining us, and here's to your next leap in business growth.